What if Roronoa Zoro never existed in the One Piece story? What if he was never born? Who would take his spot and thus become Luffy's right-hand man? Who would become Luffy's accidental punching bag? Or who would be the big brother to our little emergency food? Would a certain group of people finally be safe from the maniac chasing them or not? Brace yourselves, because the changes occurring in this what-if scenario result in an insanely hype alternate version of One Piece. As we know, Zoro plays a major role in the Straw Hat crew and the whole One Piece plot in general, from his epic fight scenes and the opponents he takes down to his great comedic moments, all the way to the badass way he acts and the inspiring lines he delivers. Being one of the two wings of the future Pirate King, will Luffy losing one of those arms cause his dreams of becoming a Pirate King to fail or not? Well, since this is an obvious answer, let's just spoil the video a bit for you. In reality, this video will not analyze whether Luffy would fail in becoming the Pirate King without Zoro's help. Rather, we will count all the times that Luffy and the Straw Hats would lose without Zoro's presence. Pick a number, and let's see if by the end of the video, you can get close to how many times Zoro's presence saved Luffy, and all of the Straw Hats for that matter. Let's start from the very beginning, aka Zoro's backstory. Since in this version of the story, Zoro does not exist, Kuina's backstory is not shown to us. She is no longer relevant. And yeah, because of that, we unfortunately never get to meet the ruthless and legendary Down D Stairs that took Kuina's life in the original story. But now, let's get to the actual story that began on episode 1. You see, Zoro's absence causes a major change, not only for the members of the Straw Hats and the members of a certain group, if you know what I mean, but also the members of the Marines. Why? Well, let's go back to the way Luffy actually met Zoro. As we know, Zoro's was the only Straw Hat member that Luffy knew in advance that he wanted to recruit. But what happens now that Zoro does not exist? Well, hear this. After Kobe finds Luffy inside that barrel and Luffy defeats Alvida, Kobe, rather than abandoning Luffy, stays by his side. After all, Luffy and Kobe do not have to go to the Marine base in order to free Zoro. In the original story, that was the reason that Kobe became a Marine in the first place. You see, in reality, the reason Kobe joined the Marines was because Luffy, Zoro, and Kobe were found by the Marines. So to save Kobe, Luffy fought with him, allowing Kobe to not get in trouble for being with a pirate. And that's why if Luffy and Kobe did not go to save Zoro, Kobe would have never become a Marine, and thus remained by Luffy's side as his first ever recruit, and at the same time, his second in command. Yeah, I know Kobe is really weak at this stage, right? Well, hear me out. His evolution and power development occurs way differently in this version of the story, and he does become way stronger than what he is now in the current timeline. But will that be enough to cover the void Zoro left? Let's find out. Before we move on, let's mention another small change that occurs in this version of the story. The reason Helmeppo developed the way he did was because Kobe became a Marine as well, and thus influenced him into becoming a good and honorable Marine rather than a corrupted one like his father. And because he stays by the side of his corrupted father, Hand Axe Morgan, Garp never takes him under his guidance, and thus he does not even develop further. A small change, but yeah, still worth mentioning. When it comes to Kobe's relationships with the other Straw Hats now, well, it's obvious that Sanji does not constantly fight with him all the time like he does with Zoro. After all, their ideals are not such to come in contrast. But back to the plot development of the story. Next, we have the encounter of the Straw Hats against the Buggy Pirates. What differences will occur here? Well, in the original story, Zoro was able to defeat Buggy's crewmate, Kabaji. Truth be told, Kabaji is indeed a sword user, aka Luffy's worst enemy, as Luffy's rubber body is vulnerable to sword attacks. Zoro's place is filled by Kobe, but as we know at this stage, Kobe is still very weak. Kobe would lose against Kabaji, and thus not only die, Luffy would then be faced against both Kabaji and Buggy. And as we analyzed, sword attacks are his weakness. Luffy in this stage is also quite weak. After all, he just started his journey, and because of that, in this 2v1 scenario, Luffy would be killed, and all of his dreams and hopes crushed at the hands of the Buggy Pirates. But do you think this is the end? Well, hold on, because this was only the first time where the Straw Hats would lose without Zoro's presence. Let's assume that somehow the Straw Hats survive this encounter. Kobe somehow defeats Kabaji. Luffy, similarly to the original story, manages to defeat Buggy, and thus Luffy, Kobe, and Nami manage to escape. What now? Our next stop is none other than the Syrup Island arc, where the crew meets Usopp and Kaya. During this arc, the crew needs to fight against the Black Cat Pirates of Kuro. After Kuro had faked his own capture and execution, Kuro pretended to stumble into the Syrup village, where he was taken in by Kaya's family and acted as her servant and caretaker for 3 years, with the intent of inheriting her fortune. When he attacked, Zoro's contribution was that he defeated the Nyaban brothers. But since these two are quite weak, we will assume that even if Kobe cannot defeat them on his own, the Straw Hat crew somehow manages to take them down. Because of that, even with Zoro's absence, the crew manages to come out alive for now in this arc, similar to what happened in the original story. Usopp joins the crew, and the group sets set sail for their next destination. We all know what comes next, right? The Baratier arc, where Zoro's epic fight with Mihawk took place. You see, the reason Mihawk came to Baratier and attacked Dawn Creek was because they disturbed his nap. The same way people attack bugs when they disturb them while sleeping, right? What would Mihawk do now with the Straw Hats? Well, that's the thing. Nothing. Without Zoro challenging him to a fight, Mihawk wouldn't even bother doing anything. He would just keep going without much attention being given to him. You see, in this version of the story, Mihawk is not so important in the plot anymore. He is mentioned a few times here and there as the rival of Shanks, but he is no longer referenced all the time as the man Zoro needs to overcome. As again, Zoro is no longer part of the story. Next in the line is Arlong Park. Here in the original story, Zoro was injured after his encounter with Mihawk, and thus did not do much. He did fight and win against Hachan, but even if he didn't, the important part of this arc was Luffy's fight with Arlong. Kobe, that took the place of Zoro now, maybe he cannot defeat Hachan on his own, but he surely holds his ground without being killed. The result of this arc is the same even without Zoro, as again, Luffy defeats Arlong all the same, and thus helps Nami's village break free from the Fishman's rule. On to the Alabasta arc. You see, in the early parts of this arc, a great incident took place, showcasing just how badass Zoro really is. This incident echoed the name of Zoro throughout the Grand Line. When the Baroque work agents set a trap for the Straw Hats, Zoro saw right through their cunning plan and ended up slicing every last one of the 100 bounty hunters, as well as top-rank mercenaries of the organization available at Whiskey Peak. However, even without Zoro's contribution, I do believe that Luffy could handle those bounty hunters as well on his own. So, no changes happen in this arc thus far. But in the same arc, Zoro had to fight Mr. One, and this guy was by far the most formidable and difficult opponent Zoro had faced so far. Yeah, I don't really count Mihawk, as again, that cannot even be considered a match, but rather a one-sided massacre. Daz Bones had the ability of the Dice fruit, and because of that, he could turn his body into a sharp and powerful blade. As the battle progressed, Zoro found his back against the wall, but during the battle, he learned to cut steel and sliced him with his enticing swordplay. But how about Kobe? Well, it's quite obvious that he cannot defeat Daz Bones. Because of that, Daz Bones is left alive and creates an important advantage for the Baroque agents, which in turn outnumber and outmatch the Straw Hats. One by one, the Straw Hats are killed, and the only one left is Luffy, who is now tasked to fight all of Daz Bones, Miss Doublefinger, Miss Merry Christmas, Bon Clay, and even Crocodile. Naturally, Luffy loses, and thus, this is the second time the Straw Hats would fail without Zoro being part of their crew. But let's assume the Straw Hats somehow survive, all of the Baroque agents as well as Crocodile are defeated, and thus the Straw Hats keep going. Let's see how many more times the Straw Hats will fail without Zoro. Next up, it's Skypiea. In Skypiea arc, when Zoro was taking a stroll, he was intercepted by Braham, a Shandia warrior, and ended up engaging in battle with him. With his 36-pound cannon, he sliced the Shandia warrior and won. Later, he even took revenge for Chopper by defeating Ohm. Since these two opponents were not major ones, we will assume that Kobe, that keeps getting stronger all the time, manages to help in defeating these opponents. Yes, he's not as strong as Zoro, and thus maybe cannot defeat them on his own, but since they are not main opponents that can get in the way of Luffy or the other characters, we will assume that Zoro's absence does not cause the plot of the Skypiea arc to change for our story. How about the next arc in line, Water 7? Well, again, here Zoro's contribution was limited in helping the crew defeat the Frankie family. Even without him, they could manage just fine. However, something else quite interesting that occurs during this arc is Usopp's separation from the Straw Hats. Do you remember how Usopp returned in the crew? As soon as Usopp wanted to return, Luffy was ready to take him back. If it wasn't for Zoro giving that epic speech, then Usopp could just join right back in without apologizing, and that could definitely lead into further problems down the line due to lack of respect towards the captain of the crew, Luffy. But hold on, because in the next arc, meaning the Enies Lobby, Zoro did do something that saved the lives of everyone. You see, on the way to Enies Lobby, Zoro cut an entire sea train in half in order for their train to not collide with it. Kobe obviously can't do that. Without Zoro's contribution, the two trains collide and the Straw Hats all end up either dead from the impact or they just drown in the sea. And because of that, this is the third time that Zoro's absence would cause the Straw Hats to die. But did you think that this was the end for the Enies Lobby arc? Well, let's assume that the Straw Hats somehow survive the sea train journey and actually land on Enies Lobby. What now? You see, during the original timeline of Enies Lobby, Zoro fought against Kaku and won against him by using his new form, Ashura. Would Kobe be able to do all that? Probably not. And because of that, he would probably die as well. Since Luffy was fighting against Rob Lucci in a different location, this does not affect his side, and thus Luffy ends up winning against Rob Lucci. But for sure, the death of an important crewmate would definitely lead to the failure of the Straw Hats down the line, either shortly after or later on in their journey. So here we have the fourth time that Zoro's absence would lead the Straw Hats to failure. So far, it's obvious that Kobe does not fill Zoro's spot in any way, shape, or form. The one character who needs the time skip training as much as anyone is Kobe. But before we get there, we have the Thriller Bark arc, where Zoro fought and defeated Ryuma. Would Kobe be able to do that? Well, once again, probably not. But at least here, the Straw Hats do not die. Why? Because Nightmare Luffy would be able to step up and defeat Ryuma as well before Kobe is killed. After all, in this form, Luffy even wields a katana, and thus can take on even swordsmen. But how about after that then? Do you know what happened next? Yeah, I know. Nothing happened. But what would Kobe do in that case? Since Kobe would be defeated by Ryuma, he is surely in no shape to take Luffy's pain and survive when Kuma arrives. I mean, even if Kobe was at full health, I still doubt whether he would be able to take all this pain and make it out alive just like Zoro did. However, an important factor we must consider is whether Kuma was actually willing to kill either Luffy or Zoro. We don't know that Kuma's intentions were to help the Straw Hats, so at the end of the day, what Kuma did to Zoro was just a test to see both the overall strength of the crew as well as their loyalty to their captain, all in order to measure whether the Straw Hat crew was actually ready to enter the new world. But at the end of the day, we still don't know what would Kuma do if Zoro was not strong enough to take Luffy's pain. However, given Kuma's motives, we can confidently say that the Straw Hats survived for now. Next arc in line is the Subodi Archipelago, where Luffy punched St. Charlos and caused the Buster Call. But before Kizaru killed the Straw Hats, Kuma stepped in and separated the Straw Hats. This same thing happens in this version of One Piece as well. After this arc, we have the Marineford arc. The important difference here, though, is not so much Zoro's absence, but rather Kobe's absence as a Marine. After all, Zoro was not even part of the Marineford arc to begin with. You see, without Kobe, way more people would die during Marineford. Why? Well, that's because the one who stopped the war for a brief moment by stepping up was Kobe. This allowed Shanks to enter the battlefield and end the war once and for all. If Kobe is now a Straw Hat, not only will he not be present during the war, as again, the Straw Hats are separated at this point, he would also have absolutely no authority to speak on behalf of the Marines. Yep, pretty much the same outcome would apply for Luffy and the Straw Hats, as no additional death comes on their end. But still, Kobe's absence from the Marines does cause some significant changes and some additional deaths. But now, we are finally headed towards the time skip. You see, Kobe realizes that he is far too weak to be the vice captain of the Straw Hats. During the 2-year time skip, he trains extremely hard, and thus, when he returns, he is now a worthy member of the Straw Hats. Is he as strong as Zoro? Probably not, but he is surely way stronger than what he is at this point in time in the original story. After all, he went through way more battles, hardships, and he also trained extremely more rigorously to become stronger. The next arc in line is the Fishman Island arc. Here, Zoro almost ended the arc 30 chapters early by slicing Hody Jones. But since Hody Jones survived, and thus Luffy was the one to take him down, something similar happens in this version of the story as well. No matter if Kobe got significantly stronger, he would still not be stronger than what Zoro was at this stage. Thus, Hody Jones survives his encounter with Kobe, just like he survived his encounter with Zoro, and is later on defeated by Luffy. Next, we have the Punk Hazard arc, where the most noteworthy battle Zoro had was against Monet. How would Kobe do? Well, together with Tashigi, Kobe is perfectly capable of defeating Monet, meaning that during this arc, no significant changes happen. However, the next opponent of Zoro was not as weak as Monet. That's because during Dressrosa, Zoro encounters Pika. After all, Pika is one of the top 3 officers of the Don Quixote pirates. He ate the Ishi Ishi no Mi that allowed him to merge and assimilate with any form of stone, thus giving him the ability to turn into an insanely big opponent protected by stones. Because of that, Kobe loses against Pika. But does this mean defeat for the Straw Hats? Not exactly, because before Kobe is killed, Fujitora, who is present in the Dressrosa arc as well, steps up and takes care of Pika. All in all, the Straw Hats managed to liberate Dressrosa the same way they did in the original story, without any of their members dying. And now, Wano. Zoro played a crucial role in defeating Kaido. During Luffy's fight with Kaido, he played a significant part in protecting his captain. There was even a time when Luffy took a nap while in battle because he knew that Zoro would protect him no matter what. I mean, if that does not show just how much Luffy trusts Zoro, I don't know what does. Not only that, but Zoro even managed to injure Kaido at some point. It's quite obvious that without Zoro, Luffy would die much sooner. Even if we assume that Luffy can survive with only the help of Kobe and not Zoro, that, as mentioned, Kobe is indeed much weaker than Zoro. The other thing that would definitely happen is that Kobe would surely lose against King. I mean, Kobe's not like Zoro. He would not get all his stats increased when King took off his mask. You see, King is Kaido's right-hand man. His fighting style is a wild one, eschewing proper form and technique in favor of a savage yet practical mixture of swordplay, hand-to-hand combat, his Zoan transformation, and even a Lunarian's natural ability to emit fire. Even though Koby progressed greatly so far, he is still no match for King, meaning that either on this arc or in future arcs, Koby's defeat would lead to the fall of the Straw Hats. You see, if King is left free to help the other members of the Beast Pirates, the Straw Hats would one after another get defeated. That makes it the 5th time that Zoro's absence would translate as the Straw Hats failing their goals. And that's only until the Wano arc. It is sure beyond any doubt that without Zoro, the Straw Hats would have absolutely no chance at achieving their goals. Sanji would not find the All Blue, Usopp would die before becoming a great warrior of the sea, Chopper would die before curing all diseases, Frankie would die before creating a ship that would sail throughout the entire world, Brook would not reunite with Laboon, Nico Robin would not unveil the secret of the Void Century, Nami would not create a map for the entire world, and finally, Luffy would not become the Pirate King. The Straw Hats would fail not 1, 2, 3, or even 4 times, but rather they would all die in at least 5 separate occasions. Zoro is almost as important to the Straw Hats as Luffy is. Check out this video where we present what would have happened if Prime Whitebeard went to Marineford. Go on, check it out!